Alright, I get it, this probably isn't the most modest way to kick things off, but trust me, you'll understand soon enough. I'm 40 now, and over the last few months, I've been in bed with not one, not two, but 3 stunning women. I mean, really, how many guys can honestly claim to have done that? And no, I'm not talking about some casual flings or a wild fantasy. This was all very real. Each one of them, gorgeous, irresistible, and all part of a carefully laid out plan. Now, before you go rolling your eyes, thinking I'm just full of it, let's set the record straight. This wasn't about trying to prove I'm some kind of playboy or that I'm going through some midlife crisis. Nope, it was all about revenge. Cold, calculated revenge on my wife. Yeah, you read that right. This isn't going to be one of those feel-good stories where I find some profound inner peace or learn a life lesson. No, this tale is messy, raw, and far from apologetic. So, if you're curious to hear how it all went down, strap in. It's a wild ride, and I'm not holding anything back. Let's rewind to where it all began. I'm just your average guy, no flash, no millionaire lifestyle, nothing like that. I've been married for 11 years, been with her for even longer. We've got 2 kids, a mortgage, basically, a textbook suburban life. If you'd asked me before this whole thing blew up, I'd have said our marriage wasn't perfect, but it wasn't falling apart either. I thought we were solid, you know, like an old pair of shoes you've had for ages. They're a little scuffed up, sure, but they're still holding together. Turns out, I couldn't have been more wrong. The night that changed everything started out just like any other. I came home from work, beat but looking forward to a quiet evening. She'd cooked dinner that night, something nice, like she was putting in some extra effort. There was this look on her face, the one that said she had something to discuss, but I had no idea about the bombshell she was about to drop. We sat down at the table. The kids were already tucked in for the night, and I started digging into my plate like usual. But just as I was starting to settle in, she began talking. Not the usual chit-chat about work or how the day went, but the heavy stuff, about our marriage. Out of the blue, she starts saying how everything feels stagnant, like the spark in our marriage had completely fizzled out. Her words cut deep, but I kept my cool. Now, don't get me wrong. I wasn't clueless. I knew things had lost some of their excitement compared to when we first got together. But isn't that normal? After 10+ years, 2 kids, and demanding jobs, things are bound to slow down, right? In my mind, that didn't mean the end of the road, it just meant we needed to put in a little more effort. Marriage is work. But apparently, I was the only one who saw it that way. I sat there, quietly listening as she went on about how bored she was, how our lives had become so predictable. I was still mid-bite, fork in hand, when she dropped the real bomb. She said she wanted to open up our relationship. I froze. Whatever was in my mouth suddenly tasted like cardboard. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside, I was screaming. I'd expected her to suggest counseling or maybe talk about ways to spice things up, or hell, even bring up the possibility of separation. But this? I didn't see this coming at all. She kept talking, completely ignoring the rage that was brewing inside me. I don't see it as cheating, she said, like she was chatting about trying out a new workout routine. Just for a little while. We both need some space, some freedom. Freedom. Can you believe that? There she was, sitting right in front of me, basically giving me a sales pitch on how she could sleep with someone else without feeling guilty. And the way she said it, so casual, like this was what normal couples do when they hit a bump in the road. She wanted it all, to enjoy the comforts of our marriage while getting to mess around on the side, without a care in the world. I didn't say a word. I kept chewing, nodding every now and then as if I was seriously considering what she was saying. But in reality, I was holding back the urge to flip the table and storm out. Then, something clicked in my head. As she rambled on about how this open relationship could actually help us, I had a realization. our marriage was already over. It was a corpse, and she just hadn't admitted it yet. Listen, if your wife starts talking about wanting an open relationship, it's done. She's already checked out, emotionally, mentally, and probably even physically. What she was really asking for wasn't a break, she'd already found someone else. I could see it in how eager she was to justify this idea. Some other guy was already in her head, or worse, in her bed, and she was just trying to make it seem legitimate. But instead of blowing up right then and there, I stayed calm. I agreed. Yeah, I went along with her ridiculous plan. Why? Because I knew I could play the long game. I was fully aware she thought she'd just scored a free pass to mess around while I stayed home like some clueless fool. But what she didn't realize was that I had my own agenda. If she wanted an open relationship, fine. I'd let her believe she was in control, but I'd get my revenge in ways she couldn't even begin to imagine. So, I smiled, took another bite of my now tasteless dinner, and said, you know what? Maybe you're right. And that's how it all started. That night, after our little chat about this so-called open relationship, I couldn't sleep. She was lying right next to me, sound asleep, wearing those earplugs and that ridiculous eye mask she swore helped her sleep better. I had to chuckle a bit. Here she was, thinking she was clever, completely unaware of what I was about to set in motion. We used to have no secrets, or at least, that's what I thought. We shared everything, our phones, passwords, the whole deal. So, as I slipped my hand under her pillow to grab her phone, I prayed she hadn't changed her password. I took a deep breath, punched in the code, and bam, it unlocked. A mix of excitement and anger washed over me. She really believed I wouldn't catch on, didn't she? First thing I did was open up her messages. My hands were shaking a bit, I won't lie. My mind was racing, a mix of fury and fear about what I might find. And it didn't take long to confirm my suspicions. Right there, in the middle of the chat app, was this idiot she was planning to cheat with. Some pretty boy with a cocky profile picture, probably thinking he'd scored an easy fling with my wife. The messages, they were bold, to say the least. Let's just say, if she hadn't crossed the line physically yet, it was only a matter of time. The way they were chatting, the way she was responding, it was crystal clear she was already gone, at least mentally. And honestly, does it even matter if they haven't done the deed yet? Cheating is cheating, and for me, the emotional kind hurts just as much as the physical. From the looks of their messages and the flirty emojis, it wasn't going to stay emotional for much longer. I took screenshots, saved his Instagram profile, and sent everything to myself, just in case I needed solid proof down the line. By the time I was finished, I had enough ammo to blow this whole situation sky high. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. I needed to be smart about this. So, what was my next move? I called in some reinforcements. I grabbed my phone and started dialing up a couple of my closest friends. I knew they'd be annoyed I was calling them in the middle of the night, but this couldn't wait. I needed them on board with what I was planning, and I needed them now. One by one, I woke them up, told them to meet me at the park. No questions, just get there. We all got there at about the same time. It was late, probably around 1 or 2 in the morning, so the park was completely empty except for a few streetlights casting long shadows across the grass. At first, they looked confused, maybe even a bit annoyed, but as soon as they caught a glimpse of my expression, they knew this wasn't just some casual meeting. "What's going on, man?" one of them blurted out, rubbing his eyes. I didn't waste any time. I laid it all out for them, the dinner, the whole open relationship nonsense, and the messages I'd uncovered. They didn't say much at first, just stood there listening, absorbing it all. I could tell they were as stunned as I had been. When I pulled up the screenshots, their initial disbelief quickly morphed into anger. "So, what's the plan?" one of them finally asked, eyes wide with shock. I laid out my idea. It wasn't completely worked out yet, but I had the general framework in mind. I had to get ahead of this. I needed to make sure that when everything came crashing down, I'd be the one in control, not her. But to do that, I was going to need their help. At first, they looked at me like I was nuts. I could see it on their faces. What I was proposing was risky, maybe even a bit extreme. But after we talked it over and made a few tweaks to the plan, they finally came around. We all agreed, this had to be handled swiftly and with precision. No half measures. As we left the park, I felt this weird combination of relief and dread. On one hand, I now had a plan and friends who were willing to back me up. But on the other hand, I knew there was no turning back. What I was about to do would change everything, and I couldn't afford to second-guess myself. When I got back home, I crept back into bed beside her. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Fear started creeping in. What if this all blew up in my face? What if she figured out what I was planning before I could put it in motion? But then I remembered those messages, her smug, carefree attitude, and that fear disappeared. This needed to be done. As soon as the first light of morning peeked through the blinds, I was wide awake, my thoughts running a mile a minute. I couldn't wait around any longer. Last night's revelations were still burning fresh in my mind, and I wasn't about to play the part of the clueless husband. I needed to act, and I needed to act now. Without a second thought, I grabbed my phone and dialed up a divorce lawyer. Didn't matter that it was early. If this guy was as good as his reviews claimed, he'd understand why I was calling at the crack of dawn. When he finally picked up, I didn't bother with small talk. I want to file for divorce, I said, my voice steady and sharp. My wife's cheating on me, and I need to get the paperwork started as soon as possible. There was a brief pause on the other end. Maybe he was taken aback by how direct I was, or maybe he'd heard it all before. Either way, he got down to business quickly, asking for some basic details and explaining the steps we'd need to follow. He started talking about gathering evidence, but I cut him off. Don't worry about that, I told him. I've already got plenty. He set up a meeting for that afternoon to start the paperwork. When I hung up, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. I wasn't just some guy who'd caught his wife in an emotional affair. I was about to end a marriage. And as much as it hurt, there was no way I was going to let her walk away unscathed. While I was getting the legal side locked down, the rest of my plan was already in motion. You see, this wasn't just about a divorce. If that's all I wanted, I could have packed my things and walked out. No, this was about revenge. I wasn't going to let her get away with what she was doing, not without consequences. My friends had tracked down the guy, the one my wife had been planning to cheat with. It wasn't exactly a difficult task. The idiot's Instagram was wide open, filled with pictures of his wannabe influencer lifestyle, expensive watches, flashy cars, posing with models who probably didn't even know his name. A classic loser, trying to come off as someone way more important than he actually was. And guess what? The moment my friends confronted him, he crumbled. I had expected a little pushback, maybe some excuses or a bit of bravado, but this guy turned out to be nothing more than a spineless coward. I didn't even need to be there. He spilled his guts without so much as a hint of a threat. Turns out, he was a lot braver hiding behind a screen than he was in real life. I swear, man, I had no idea she was married, he blurted out, probably hoping he could talk his way out of the mess he'd landed himself in. My friends didn't even have to raise their voices. They laid it all out for him, told him he was caught up in something way bigger than he'd ever imagined, and the guy practically begged for a way out. I'll give him this, at least he knew when he was beat. He didn't try to run, didn't get defensive. He quickly realized that getting mixed up with a married woman wasn't just a minor mistake, it was about to wreck his life if he wasn't careful. So, I gave him a choice. He could either disappear and cut off all contact with her for good, or he could become my informant. I didn't want to have him beaten up or anything over the top, that wasn't my goal. Sure, I was furious, but this wasn't really about him. This was about her. If she hadn't wanted to cheat, he wouldn't have even been a factor. Instead of wasting my energy on him, I decided to make him useful. He became my inside man. From that point on, every single move they planned came straight back to me. Their so-called secret meetups. I was already in the loop. Their flirty text messages. I had them all saved. My friends kept tabs on him, and he kept feeding me information. I made it crystal clear, if he even thought about tipping her off, he'd regret it. Just like that, he became my pawn. He'd report everything to me, and in return, he got to keep his face in one piece and his life relatively untouched. Then came the day of their big rendezvous, the one she thought she'd orchestrated so cleverly, sneaking off for the weekend. It was a Friday morning when she casually mentioned over breakfast that she'd be spending a few days at her parents' place. I could see right through her little act, that fake, casual tone, as if she was planning an innocent family visit. But I already knew exactly where she was headed. "I'm going to spend the weekend with my parents," she said, sipping her coffee as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. I just smiled, playing the part of the clueless husband she thought I was. "Oh, that's nice," I replied, trying to keep the laughter from bubbling up. "Be sure to give them my regards." She smiled back, probably thinking she'd pulled one over on me, that she could go off and do whatever she pleased while I stayed home like some oblivious fool. Little did she know, I was already setting the next part of my plan in motion. The second she left the house, I was ready. It was time to switch from defense to offense. The real game was about to begin. As soon as she was out the door, I knew everything was lining up perfectly. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, my heart pounded, but not from fear, from pure anticipation. I wasn't some helpless victim here. I was the one pulling the strings. I grabbed my phone and sent a quick text to my friends. It was time. About 30 minutes later, they pulled up outside, bringing the party with them, booze, laughter, and 3 younger women who were more than eager to turn things up a notch. The atmosphere changed the second they walked in. It was like the air in the house shifted. This was the turning point, and in every sense, it really was. We didn't waste a second. The drink started flowing, and soon the room was filled with laughter, growing louder and more playful as the alcohol worked its magic. We were cracking up like a bunch of idiots, throwing back shots, toasting to the most absurd things. It all felt so surreal. These girls, all in their 20s, brought a kind of wild, carefree energy that I hadn't felt in years. They were flirty, uninhibited, and living purely for the fun of the moment. The more we drank, the more I could feel the weight of everything lifting off my shoulders, even if it was only temporary. And right there, in the middle of it all, I felt that thrill buzzing deep down because I knew something she didn't. Her little boyfriend wasn't coming. He had blocked her, probably scared stiff about what could go down if things got out of hand. I had orchestrated that part too. He was just a puppet in my game, and he didn't even know it. While she thought she was off for a secret weekend escape, I knew she'd end up turning back around, pissed and humiliated when he ghosted her. She'd have no choice but to come crawling back home. But until that happened, I planned to enjoy every second of my own little party. The girls, now tipsy and laughing uncontrollably, suggested we take things to the bedroom. The mood shifted, playful, electric. I could feel my own reservations melting away with every shot I downed. Why not? This was the revenge she'd never see coming. We headed upstairs, one of them tugging at my arm, leading me toward the bedroom like we were in some wild game. Once inside, things escalated fast. The girls were giggling, casually tossing their tops aside like it was the most natural thing in the world. Before I knew it, I was joining in, piece by piece. It all felt surreal, the warm blur of alcohol, the thrill of the moment, the sudden sense of freedom. For so long, I'd been the faithful husband, the reliable provider who worked hard and stayed true. But this? This was different. It was like being let off a leash after years of restraint, and in that instant, I didn't care about anything but being in the moment. As clothes hit the floor, the feeling of revenge blazed hotter inside me. I was actually enjoying it, giving in to the chaos, caught up in the reckless abandon. These three, so much younger, full of energy, and completely uninhibited, made it feel like I was in some kind of alternate reality. I won't lie, it was exhilarating. The kind of sex where you forget everything else, where nothing matters except the raw intensity, the adrenaline rush, the heat of the moment. Then, just when I thought I was completely lost in it, I heard a noise, a voice piercing through the haze. "What the hell is going on here?" she screamed. I hadn't even heard the front door open. Didn't hear her coming up the stairs. But there she was, standing in the doorway, her face twisted in a mix of shock, disbelief, and sheer fury. Her eyes swept across the room, taking in the sight of me in bed with three half-naked women, the air heavy with the stench of alcohol and bad choices. I paused for a second, just long enough to turn my head toward her with the biggest, most sarcastic grin I could muster. "Oh, this?" I said, my voice dripping with mockery. "It's just a free relationship, sweetheart. You know, like you wanted. By the way, how are your parents?" Her face went from bright red to ghostly pale in a heartbeat. I saw the realization hit her like a freight train. She knew. She knew that I had orchestrated every piece of this. The fact that I had flipped the script on her so perfectly, it shattered her. I could see it in her eyes. She completely lost it. In a wild frenzy, she lunged toward the bed, yanking the girls off of me one by one. Her hands were trembling with rage as she threw their clothes at them, screaming for them to get out. The girls, tipsy and stumbling from all the alcohol, didn't even put up a fight. They just grabbed their things as quickly as they could and made their way out, half-dressed, their giggles echoing down the stairs and through the front door. To them, it was nothing more than a wild night that took an unexpected turn. Once the girls had gone, she collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands as the sobs took over. And these weren't the quiet, soft tears, no, this was the full-blown, ugly crying, the kind that shakes your entire body. She was completely losing control, didn't know what to do, and honestly, I couldn't have cared less. I calmly started getting dressed while she sat there breaking down beside me. I didn't rush it, I took my time. I pulled on my clothes, buttoned up my shirt, adjusted my belt. When I was done, I sat down next to her on the bed. I didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy, not anymore. This was on her. She had made her choices, pushed us to this point, and now she was dealing with the fallout. "How was your date?" I asked, my tone almost casual, as if I were inquiring about the weather. She lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen, tears still streaming down her cheeks. And that's when it hit her. She realized that I had set this whole thing up, that I'd planned every detail. She didn't need to say a word, the look in her eyes told me she understood exactly what had happened. She started to open her mouth, probably to say something, but I cut her off. "Don't bother," I said, my voice calm but firm. "A lawyer's going to call you tomorrow. We're done. I'm filing for divorce." I stood up, looking down at her one last time. "There's no point in arguing or screaming. It won't change anything. What's done is done." And just like that, I walked out of the room, leaving her there in her misery. No more shouting, no more drama. I was finished with all of it. She had made her bed, and now she would have to lie in it. The next day, after everything that had gone down, I knew I needed to clear my head and talk it out with my friends. We'd been through plenty together over the years, but this was a whole new level of insanity. I texted them that morning, and they quickly agreed to meet at our usual spot, the local bar where we'd spent countless nights just shooting the breeze. But today, the story would be all mine. When I walked into the bar, they were already there, seated around our usual table, beers in hand and grinning like they knew something big was coming. As soon as I sat down, one of them leaned forward and said, "All right, man, we've been dying to hear how it went down. Don't leave out a single detail." I didn't need much of an invitation. I started from the beginning, recounting everything, from the moment my wife walked out the door, thinking she was heading off to her little affair, to the moment her so-called lover blocked her, leaving her to come back home to an unexpected surprise. My friends hung on every word, laughing and shaking their heads as I described the scene in the bedroom, the booze, the girls, and, of course, the grand finale, her walking in on me right in the middle of it all. "Wait, one of my buddies interrupted, barely able to contain his laughter. "She just walks in, and you're like, oh, hey, it's a free relationship, babe. That's pure gold." I couldn't help but laugh, too. "Yeah, pretty much." She froze at first, had no clue what to do, and then just went absolutely ballistic. I swear, the look on her face was priceless. She started throwing the girls out of the house like she hadn't just pitched the idea of an open relationship a few days ago. Another friend, shaking his head in disbelief, took a long swig of his beer. "Man, you pulled that off perfectly. I would have paid good money to see that." The laughter around the table grew louder as I continued with the story, describing how, after she'd thrown the girls out, she sat down on the bed, crying her eyes out, completely shattered. I went on to explain how I had calmly, without any fuss, told her that a lawyer would be contacting her the next day about the divorce. One of my buddies, who had been quieter than the rest, leaned back in his chair, a smirk forming on his face. "You know, I've got to admit, I kind of envy you. 3 girls at once, and she had to walk in on it. That's the ultimate revenge." I just shook my head, still grinning. Yeah, it was definitely something else, but honestly, it wasn't just about that. It wasn't really about screwing around or even getting back at her. It was about proving to her that she wasn't pulling the strings anymore, that she wasn't in control. The table fell silent for a moment as they nodded, taking in what I was saying. Sure, revenge was part of it, but at its core, it was about reclaiming my dignity, the dignity she had shredded with all her lies and betrayal. I raised my glass, looking each of them in the eye. "I really have to thank you guys. You've had my back through all of this. Without you, I don't know how I would have managed. Everyone deserves friends like you." We clinked our glasses together, sharing a moment of quiet solidarity. These guys had been there for me through thick and thin, and I wouldn't have gotten through this mess without them. As we finished our beers, I started talking about how the divorce process went down. The surprising part? The whole thing was way less dramatic than I had expected. After everything that happened, I think she just realized there was nothing left to fight for. It was like she knew she had lost, and dragging it out would be pointless. One of them raised an eyebrow. "No screaming matches or last-minute drama?" I shook my head. "Nope, none of that. It was shockingly calm. We split the property pretty evenly. I wasn't trying to take everything from her. What would be the point? It wasn't worth the extra hassle. The house, the cars, all of it got divided up without much argument. I think she was just too worn out to keep fighting, and to be honest, I didn't have the energy for it either." They all nodded in understanding. We had all seen or heard about divorces that dragged on for years, with both sides tearing each other apart. But in my case, it felt like we both knew the game was over. There was no use pretending anymore. She signed the papers, and that was the end of it. "So, what now?" one of my friends asked, leaning forward. "You've got your freedom back. What's next for you?" I smiled, but there was a trace of exhaustion behind it. "I don't really know, man. I'm just trying to focus on moving forward. I've spent so much time looking back, trying to figure out where everything went wrong. I think it's time to just let it go and start fresh." We spent the rest of the night drinking, laughing, and swapping stories, but the weight of everything that had happened lingered in the background. By the time I finally left the bar, I felt lighter than I had in years. It was a feeling of closure, of finally ending a chapter in my life that had dragged on for far too long. And now, to anyone reading this, I want to thank you for sticking with me through my story. It's not an easy thing to go through, but I'm here to tell you that you can come out on the other side, no matter how messy it gets. If there's one lesson I've learned from all of this, it's that you have to pay attention. Don't get so comfortable that you ignore the signs. Take a good look at your spouse, really look. Don't let things fall apart without noticing. And if they do, don't be afraid to take control of the situation. Trust me, you don't want to end up like I did, learning the hard way. Update: it's been a little over a year since everything went down, and I thought it was about time to share an update on where things stand now. Looking back, it's almost surreal how much has changed. When you're in the thick of it, it feels like your whole world is crumbling, but now, well, now it feels like everything is finally starting to come together in ways I never saw coming. First off, the divorce. That's done, dusted, and left in the past. It was, without a doubt, the best decision I could have made, and I don't regret a single bit of it. The process was surprisingly smooth, especially considering how ugly it could have been. I've heard horror stories about divorces dragging on for years, with endless court battles over every tiny detail. But in my case, after that last showdown, my ex seemed too drained to put up much of a fight. Maybe she realized it was pointless, or maybe she wanted out just as much as I did. Either way, we split the house, the cars, and the money, and that was it. A clean break. I got what I needed, and she got what she had coming. Now, let's talk about what really matters: life after the storm. It's been a whirlwind, but in the best way possible. After the divorce, I made a conscious decision to focus on myself for the first time in years. And I'm not just talking about the usual, hit the gym, get in shape, kind of thing, though yeah, I did that too. It's amazing what a little freedom and motivation can do for your fitness. I dropped some weight, packed on some muscle, and honestly, I'm in the best shape I've been in since my 20s. But the physical transformation? That's just the tip of the iceberg. The real change happened inside. For the first time in ages, I started thinking about what I wanted in life. What kind of future did I want to build now that I was no longer tied down in a toxic relationship? It wasn't an easy question to answer. I had to spend some time really figuring out what mattered to me, what I was genuinely passionate about. One of the biggest surprises? My career. I threw myself into my work, not just as a distraction, but as a way to redefine who I was. And the funny thing is, once I stopped holding back and started taking a few risks, opportunities started popping up. I had this idea for a side business, something that had been floating in my mind for a while but I never had the courage to pursue. I won't go into too many specifics, but let's just say it's a tech-related venture, something I've been passionate about for years but always pushed aside because, well, life. After the divorce, I decided to take the plunge and really invest my time and energy into making it happen. It wasn't easy, there were plenty of late nights, moments of self-doubt, and times when I wondered if I was just wasting my time. But gradually, things started to fall into place. I built a small team, got some investors on board, and before I knew it, the business was taking off. A year later, we're not just scraping by, we're thriving. I'm not claiming to be a millionaire, but the success I've had with this venture has brought me a sense of pride and purpose I haven't felt in a long time. I even made a few headlines in the local business news, nothing huge, but it felt great to get some recognition for all the hard work. And the best part? I'm doing it all on my own terms. No one to answer to but myself. It's a feeling I never thought I'd get to experience after being stuck in that suffocating marriage for so long. On the personal front, life has been good, better than good, actually. I've reconnected with old friends, made some new ones, and, most importantly, I've learned to enjoy my own company again. For a while after the divorce, I stayed single on purpose. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I needed time to heal, to clear my head, and to rediscover who I was outside of being someone's husband. But, as things often go, someone eventually came along. We met through mutual friends, completely unplanned, totally unexpected, and we just clicked. She's incredible, smart, funny, and independent. The best part? She's not looking for anything from me other than honesty and a good time. No drama, no baggage. It's been a breath of fresh air, to say the least. I'm taking things slow this time around, though. I'm not rushing into anything serious. But for the first time in a long while, I feel hopeful about where this could lead. And as for my ex-wife? Well, from what I've heard through the grapevine, things haven't exactly been smooth for her. She's been through a few relationships since our divorce, none of which seem to have lasted. I don't wish her any harm, well, not anymore, at least. I've moved past that now. If anything, I hope she finds whatever it is she's searching for, though I suspect she probably won't. People like her rarely do. Looking back, it's crazy to think about how much has changed in just over a year. If you had told me a year ago that I'd be where I am now, running a successful business, in the best shape of my life, and seeing someone new, I probably would have laughed in disbelief. But here I am. And if there's one big lesson I've learned from all of this, it's that sometimes you have to lose everything to truly find yourself. So, to anyone reading this, especially if you're going through something similar, just know that it does get better. It might not seem like it at first, but trust me, it will. You just have to hold on, take charge of your life, and be ready to make those tough choices when the moment comes. So yeah, I'd say life's pretty damn good right now. And I fully intend to keep it that way.